The day Charlotte Whitmore decided to destroy her own future was the coldest morning of February in Boston. The sky above Whitmore House was pale and sharp, like cracked glass. Snow clung to the iron gates and the bare trees in the yard. Inside the grand brick home on Beacon Hill, everything looked polished and calm. But Charlotte felt as if the walls were closing in around her. She stood outside her mother's study door and heard her name spoken in a voice that sounded sweet and careful. And that voice always meant something was already decided. "Mr. Harold Whitfield will arrive by Sunday," her mother was saying. "The wedding must take place before the end of the month. We cannot delay any longer." Charlotte felt her stomach turn cold. She knew that name too well. Harold Whitfield was 60 years old. He owned railroads in 3 states. His first wife had died suddenly, and no one ever spoke about how. He had visited their home twice. Each time he had looked at Charlotte as if she were something displayed in a shop window. Her mother called him respectable. Her mother called him security. Charlotte was 22 years old. Since her father died the year before, she had become something else entirely in her mother's eyes. Not a daughter, not family. She was an answer to a problem. The Whitmore fortune had not survived her father. The investments had failed. The bank accounts were thinner than anyone outside the house knew. The servants had been dismissed one by one. The ballroom had not seen music in months, but her mother still held her head high at church. She still smiled at neighbors as if nothing had changed. The only way to keep that illusion alive was to sell Charlotte into a marriage. Charlotte stepped away from the study door before she could hear more. She did not cry. She had cried too much in the months after her father's death. Now she felt something harder forming inside her chest. That night, she went to her father's old office. The fire had not been lit in weeks. Dust rested on his desk. She touched the worn leather chair where he used to sit and felt the ache of missing him rise in her throat. Her father had loved her, not as a bargain, not as a solution. She sat there in the cold room and made a choice that would change everything. If her mother wanted her married so badly, then she would get married. But not to Harold Whitfield. Or Charlotte would marry someone so completely wrong that her mother could never undo it. Someone no bank would accept. Someone no society lady would invite to dinner. Someone who would make every whisper in Boston turn sharp and loud. She would ruin herself before she allowed herself to be traded. At dawn, she packed one small case, a few dresses, a brush, a small roll of cash she had been secretly saving from her allowance for almost a year. It was not much, but it was enough for what she needed. She left through the kitchen entrance before the cook arrived. The snow crunched under her boots as she stepped into the quiet street. She did not look back at the house. Looking back would make her weak. She walked toward the lower part of the city, where the fine houses ended and narrow streets began. The air smelled of smoke and the harbor. Horses pulled carts through slush. Men stood outside shops trying to keep warm. But Charlotte stopped in a public square near the docks. It was not a place she had ever stood before. She pulled her dark cloak tighter around her shoulders and tried to steady her breathing. She needed a husband, not a drunk who would gamble away her money, not a cruel man, just someone desperate enough to agree. Someone who had nothing to lose. She had been standing there for several minutes when she saw him. He stood apart from the others, near the edge of the square. A tall man beside a dark bay horse. His coat was military style, but worn at the edges. One sleeve had been stitched where it had torn. His boots were muddy. His dark hair was slightly too long, as if he had stopped caring how he looked. He was not begging. He was not speaking. He simply stood there, with one gloved hand resting on the horse's reins. His face carried a scar along his jaw. Not ugly, not soft, just real. But he did not look broken. He looked like a man who had stepped away from something. Charlotte did not know why she chose him. Perhaps it was the way he watched the square. Calm, careful, not lost. She picked up her case and walked straight toward him before her courage could fail. He saw her coming, but did not move. She stopped 2 feet from him. "Are you married?" she asked. His eyes were gray, almost silver in the winter light. There was a brief pause before he answered. "No. Are you wanted by the law?" Another pause. "Not in Boston." She swallowed. That was enough. "I need a husband today," she said. "I can pay you now and again after the ceremony. It must be legal and immediate." He studied her face carefully. Not like Harold Whitfield had. Not like a buyer. More like he was trying to understand a puzzle. "There is a small church 3 streets from here," she continued. "The minister asks few questions, and I need this done before sunset." "What is your name?" he asked quietly. "Charlotte Whitmore." "And you are certain about this, Miss Whitmore?" She lifted her chin. "Yes." He looked at the small pouch of money in her hand. Then he looked back at her. "My name is Daniel Vale," he said. She held out the pouch. He took it. His fingers brushed her glove. His hands were steady. "Lead the way," he said. The church was old brick with narrow windows and a crooked steeple. Inside it smelled of wax and cold stone. The minister looked tired, but not surprised. He asked their names, confirmed their ages, and spoke the vows in a steady voice. Charlotte stood beside a stranger and promised to be his wife. Her heart beat hard in her chest, not from love, not from hope, from rebellion. When the minister handed them the signed certificate, Charlotte felt something strange settle over her. It was fear, but it was also freedom. Once she folded the paper carefully and slipped it into an envelope she had brought with her. Outside, snow had begun to fall again. She paid a boy to deliver the envelope to Whitmore House. "Give it to Mrs. Whitmore," she said. "Tell her it is from her daughter." Then she turned to Daniel. "I assume we should leave the city," she said. "My mother will not accept this quietly." A faint expression passed across his face. It almost looked like amusement. "Yes," he said. "We should." They rode north out of Boston before evening. The horse carried them steadily through the snow-covered roads. Charlotte had never traveled this way before, pressed close to a man she did not know, heading toward a future she could not see. They reached a small abandoned cabin near the edge of a wooded area outside Concord by nightfall. It was simple. 1 room, a rough table, a stone fireplace. Daniel built a fire quickly. He moved with quiet skill. Not rushed, not uncertain. But Charlotte sat near the flames and tried to understand what she had done. She was married. She was no longer her mother's bargaining chip, but she had tied herself to a stranger. Daniel did not speak much. When he did, his voice was calm and precise. He told her where the water pump was. He told her the door bolt needed to be set twice to hold properly. She noticed the way he watched the windows before sleeping. She noticed the dagger at his side when he removed his coat. It was not the kind of knife a common drifter carried. The handle was finely made. The metal gleamed even in low light. She said nothing. On the second morning, she saw something else. He had a wound on his shoulder, a deep scrape that had not been treated well. She insisted on cleaning it. He allowed her without argument. Up close, she saw the discipline in him, the way he sat straight even when it hurt, at the way his speech carried the tone of education. "You do not sound like a beggar," she said quietly while wrapping the bandage. "I never said I was one," he replied. "Then what are you?" He looked at her for a long moment. "A man who needed to disappear." Before she could ask more, she heard it. Hooves. More than one horse. Daniel was already standing. "Stay inside," he said. She moved to the small window and saw two men riding toward the cabin. They wore dark coats. Well, one of them held a letter in his hand. Her heart sank. Her mother had found her faster than she expected. The men dismounted and approached the door. "Mrs. Whitmore demands your return," one of them called. Charlotte stepped back from the window. Daniel opened the door and stepped outside before she could stop him. Charlotte did not sleep that night. The fire burned low in the small cabin, casting long shadows against the rough wooden walls. Daniel sat near the door with his back straight and his eyes half closed. But she knew he was not resting. He was listening, watching, waiting. Two men had not been enough. That much was clear. Charlotte sat on the edge of the narrow bed platform and tried to steady her thoughts. She had married a stranger to escape one prison and had walked into another mystery. The scar on his jaw, the trained precision in his movements, the fine dagger hidden inside his coat lining, and none of it belonged to a man living on the edges of the docks. "You fight like a soldier," she said quietly. He did not look at her. "I was one." "Was?" "Yes." The word settled between them. It was not the full truth. She could feel that. But it was a piece of it. Morning came gray and sharp. Snow covered the ground in a clean white layer, hiding the tracks from the day before. For a moment, it felt like the world had reset itself. Then Charlotte heard it again. More horses. Not two this time. Daniel stood before she could speak. He crossed to the window and looked through a narrow gap in the shutter. His jaw tightened slightly. "How many?" she whispered. "5, he said. "And your mother." Charlotte felt her breath catch. She stepped beside him and looked. Her mother sat tall on a black horse at the edge of the clearing. Even in the cold, she looked flawless. Dark coat, silver hair pinned neatly, gloves spotless. But she did not look like a woman chasing her daughter through snow. She looked like a woman correcting a mistake. The 5 men with her were not simple messengers. They sat straight in their saddles, armed, alert. Charlotte stepped back from the window. "She will not leave without me," she said. Daniel's face was unreadable. "Then we should not stay." "There is nowhere else," she replied. He was silent for a moment, thinking. There is an old hunting lodge about 3 miles northeast," he said. "Stone walls, only one entrance. It will give us advantage." "Advantage?" she repeated softly. The word sounded strange in her mouth. He met her eyes. "If this becomes a fight." Charlotte swallowed, but nodded. They left through the back of the cabin and moved quickly through the trees. The snow made the journey harder. Branches snapped under their boots, cold air burned in her lungs. Daniel walked slightly ahead, guiding her through narrow paths as if he knew the land well. She did not ask how. The hunting lodge stood alone on a small rise, built of thick stone. The roof was worn but solid. The single oak door was heavy. Inside, it was colder than the cabin, but stronger. Safer. Daniel secured the door and checked each shutter carefully. Charlotte watched him move. Every action had purpose. Nothing wasted. They had been there only a few hours when the sound of hooves reached them again. This time, there was no hiding. Charlotte looked through a narrow slit in the wood. 5 men. Her mother stepped down from her horse with calm grace. She walked forward until she stood 10 feet from the door. "Charlotte!" her mother called. Her voice carried clearly through the winter air. "This foolishness ends now!" Charlotte felt anger rise inside her, hot and sharp. "I am married," she called back. "You cannot undo that." There was a pause. I can undo many things, her mother replied smoothly, but I would rather not embarrass us both. Daniel stood beside Charlotte, silent. Your husband is not what he claims, her mother continued. He is a dangerous man. There are powerful people searching for him. Charlotte felt her chest tighten. She looked at Daniel. He did not deny it. What does she mean? Charlotte asked quietly. He did not answer. Outside, one of the armed men shifted uneasily. Charlotte noticed the way he avoided looking directly at her mother. Something about that glance struck her. A realization began to form. Her mother had not only arranged her marriage to Harold Whitfield for money. There had been something else, something larger. Charlotte's mind moved quickly, connecting pieces she had not wanted to see. Whitfield, she whispered. He was not just buying a wife. Daniel's eyes flicked toward her. He needed access, she continued, her voice low but steady. Access to our name, to our connections, to someone. She looked at him fully now. To you. The air in the room felt thin. Daniel did not look surprised. Her mother's voice rose again outside. Charlotte, come out now. You do not understand what you have involved yourself in. Charlotte stepped closer to the door. I understand more than you think, she said firmly. Daniel's expression changed slightly. Not fear, not anger, something like decision. He reached for the bolt on the heavy door. Stay behind me, he said. He opened the door and stepped out into the snow. Charlotte moved just behind him, but remained inside the threshold. The 5 men raised their weapons slightly, then hesitated. Daniel stood straight, shoulders squared. There was no sign of the quiet drifter now. His presence filled the clearing. Her mother's composure wavered for the first time. You have no authority here, she said sharply. Daniel's voice was calm. My name is Daniel Vale, he said. Then he paused. Duke of Ravenshire. The words seemed to freeze the air. Charlotte felt her heart slam against her ribs. Duke! The men exchanged quick glances. One of them lowered his weapon immediately. The others followed, uncertain. Her mother's face lost color. That is not possible, she said. Daniel continued without raising his voice. I hold the mortgages on the Whitmore estate. I hold a sealed commission from the Crown regarding a military betrayal that cost many lives. And I am very aware of the men involved. Charlotte's breath left her slowly. Her mother stepped back a fraction. You are lying, she said, but her tone lacked strength. Daniel's eyes never left hers. I suggest you tell your men to stand down, he said evenly. There was a long, tense silence. Then her mother gave a short nod. The weapons lowered completely. The shift in power was undeniable. Charlotte stepped fully outside now, standing beside Daniel. You knew, she said softly to him. Yes. You knew who I was when I approached you. Yes. And you married me anyway. He looked down at her briefly. You were in danger, he said. The words struck deeper than she expected. Her mother straightened her coat, trying to regain control. This is not over, she said coldly. But you think a title frightens me. It does not. Daniel's voice remained steady. It should. He stepped forward one pace. You aligned yourself with men who betrayed the crown. You intended to use your daughter as leverage. That alone will end badly for you. Charlotte stared at her mother. The woman she had known all her life looked suddenly smaller. Not weak, but cornered. You would choose him over your own family, her mother demanded. Charlotte lifted her chin. I chose myself, she replied. The clearing fell silent. Finally, her mother turned sharply and walked back to her horse. "This is not finished," she said before mounting. The 5 men followed her lead. Within minutes, the clearing was empty again. Snow fell lightly around them. Charlotte turned slowly toward Daniel. "A duke," she said, faintly. He gave a small nod. "I was not hiding because I was poor," he said. "I was hiding because powerful men prefer me unseen." Charlotte let out a breath she had been holding since Boston. "You could have told me." "Yes." "And I might have refused." "Yes." She studied his face carefully now. The scar, the calm eyes, the controlled strength. "Why did you agree?" she asked. He looked at her in a way that made her pulse quicken. "Because you walked across that square alone," he said, "and you were not afraid of ruin." The wind moved gently through the trees, but Charlotte realized something in that moment. She had married a stranger to escape her mother, but the stranger had been watching her long before she knew his name. And whatever game her mother had been playing was far deeper than money. There were still secrets, and Charlotte could feel them waiting. The snow stopped by morning, but the cold did not. Charlotte stood outside the hunting lodge and watched the pale winter sun rise over the trees. Everything looked calm again. Too calm. Daniel had been awake long before her. He stood near the edge of the clearing, studying the ground where the horses had stood the day before. His posture was relaxed, but she understood now that he never truly relaxed. "You said this is not over," she said quietly as she walked toward him. "It is not," he replied. "Because of my mother?" "Yes, and because of something else." Charlotte folded her arms tightly against the cold. "Tell me the rest." He was silent for a long moment, and then he turned toward her fully. "The betrayal I am investigating," he said carefully, "did not begin in the army. It began in Boston, in drawing rooms, in private dinners." Her stomach tightened. "You believe my mother is involved?" "I know she is connected," he said, "but she is not the head of it." Charlotte searched his face. "Then who is?" Daniel hesitated. That hesitation frightened her more than any answer. "Before I answer that," he said, "there is something you must understand. I did not meet you by accident." The air seemed to thin around her. "What do you mean?" "I knew you would be in that square." Her heart began to pound. "You followed me?" "No," he said. "I followed your mother." The words struck like ice water. Daniel continued calmly. "Your mother has been meeting with men tied to the betrayal. I have watched her for months. When I learned she intended to marry you to Harold Whitfield, I understood why." Charlotte shook her head slowly. "Whitfield is involved?" "Yes." She felt dizzy. Daniel's voice lowered. "Whitfield is one of the financiers behind the betrayal. He provided money. Information moved through him." Charlotte tried to breathe steadily. "And my mother?" she asked. "She provided access," Daniel said. "Access to names, to documents. But to men who trusted your father, her father." The word echoed painfully inside her. "You are wrong," she whispered. "My father would never." Daniel stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could see the struggle in his eyes. "The sealed commission I carry," he said quietly, "contains signatures, orders, transfers of funds." She felt the ground tilt beneath her. "Whose signature?" she forced herself to ask. Daniel's jaw tightened. "God, your father's." The world seemed to stop. Charlotte stared at him as if she had never seen him before. "No," she said. "That is not possible." "I hoped it was not," Daniel replied. "I hoped there was another explanation, but the paper is clear." Charlotte's chest felt tight and hollow at the same time. "My father was an honest man," she said. He served this country. He loved— I am not saying he was the mastermind, Daniel interrupted gently. But his name appears on the first agreement, the agreement that allowed military positions to be leaked. Charlotte's knees weakened. She reached for the low stone wall and sat down heavily. Memories rushed through her mind. Her father working late, closed doors, letters sealed quickly when she entered the room, tension in his eyes during his final year. Had she missed something? Daniel crouched in front of her, his voice steady but softer now. I did not marry you to use you, he said. If that is what you are thinking. She looked up at him slowly. Then why? She asked, her voice trembling. Because the moment you stood in that square, I saw something I had not expected. What? Truth. The word broke something inside her. I needed to get close to your family, he admitted. Yes, but I did not expect you to walk away from them on your own. I did not expect you to choose ruin over comfort. She searched his face for deception and found none. But you could have arrested my mother yesterday, she said. Yes, but you did not. Because I need the entire network, he replied. Whitfield, the others. Your mother is only one thread. Charlotte wiped at her eyes angrily. She would not fall apart. If my father's name is on that document, she said slowly, then I deserve to see it. Daniel hesitated only briefly before nodding. Then you will. They returned to the lodge, and he removed a folded leather case from inside his coat. And he opened it carefully and drew out several papers sealed with official markings. Charlotte's hands trembled as she took the top sheet. She recognized her father's signature immediately. Strong, clean, confident. Below it were lines detailing troop movements, transfer approvals, information that, in the wrong hands, could cost lives. Her vision blurred. There must be an explanation, she whispered. Daniel watched her carefully. There may be, he said. Signatures can be forced, or forged, or given under pressure. Charlotte looked up sharply. Pressure? Yes. He took another document from the case and handed it to her. It was a bank record. Large sums of money had moved through accounts tied to Whitfield. One of those accounts had transferred funds to an account under her mother's control. Charlotte's breath caught. And this, Daniel said quietly, occurred weeks before your father's death. Her heart pounded loudly in her ears. You think my father found out? She said slowly, and tried to stop it. I think, Daniel replied, that he may have realized too late what he had signed. Charlotte closed her eyes briefly. Her mother had always handled the finances, always managed the household accounts. Her father had trusted her. If her mother had aligned with Whitfield and others, that she could have placed papers in front of her husband at the right moment, under the right pressure. Charlotte's eyes opened slowly. My father may not have betrayed anyone, she said. Daniel held her gaze. That is why I have not made the documents public. A new understanding settled over her. He had known before she approached him in that square. He had known her name, her family, the risk, and he had still agreed to marry her. Chit, you married me knowing my father might be tied to treason, she said quietly. Yes. Why? He did not look away. Because I do not believe children carry the sins of their parents, he said, and because I believed you deserved truth. The wind pressed softly against the lodge walls. Charlotte felt something shift inside her. The anger, the fear, the confusion. It was still there, but beneath it, something stronger began to grow. Resolve. What happens now? She asked. Oh, now, Daniel said, standing. We gather proof. We confront Whitfield. And we force your mother to speak under oath. Charlotte rose to her feet slowly. And if my father truly did sign willingly? Daniel's expression softened slightly. Then we faced that truth as well. She studied him carefully. You could still annul this marriage, she said. Claim deception. Walk away clean. He stepped closer. I do not want to walk away. The simple honesty in his voice made her heart ache. I did not marry a beggar, she said softly. And I did not marry a duke. He tilted his head slightly. Then who did you marry? A man who chose justice over comfort, she answered, and who gave me a choice when no one else would. For the first time since she met him, a faint smile touched his face. Outside, the sun broke fully over the trees, casting light across the snow. Charlotte felt the weight of her old life falling away piece by piece. Her mother would not surrender easily. Wood Whitfield would fight. The truth about her father would hurt no matter what it revealed. But she was no longer a pawn. She was a wife by choice. She stepped closer to Daniel and met his eyes. We stay married, she said firmly. Yes, he replied. And we finish this together. He extended his hand to her, not as a command, not as a demand, but as an offer. She placed her hand in his. The winter was not over. The battle was not over. But Charlotte Whitmore was no longer running what she had tried to ruin her life. Instead, she had found the truth. And the man beside her was not a beggar in disguise. He was a duke who had chosen to stand in the cold and wait for a woman brave enough to meet him there. What happened next was so fast, she barely understood it. The two men moved toward him with confidence. Daniel did not raise his voice. He did not shout. He simply moved. In seconds, both men were on the ground, disarmed, breath knocked from their lungs. Each one groaned in pain. Daniel stood over them, calm and steady, as if he had done this 100 times before. Charlotte felt her world shift. This was no helpless drifter. This was a man trained for something far greater. He stepped back inside and closed the door. I believe, he said quietly, your mother will not stop with 2 men. Charlotte stared at him. Who are you? She asked. He held her gaze. That, he said, is a longer story. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and somewhere in Boston, her mother was planning her next move.